All right, I'd like to get started. Welcome to the Town Hall for the Earth Science Decadal Survey, Earth Science and Applications from Space, 2017 to 2027. What we're going to do is walk through sort of what the plan is with respect to the Decadal Survey and solicit some feedback and invite your input when we're done, but also an ongoing process, so invite your input over the course of the next year and a half or so. I am Waleed Abdullati. I, along with Tony Busalaki, am co-chairing the Decadal Survey. You'll see the members of the committee in a little bit, but I want to walk through the town hall. What we want to do today is review just a little bit about the 2007 Decadal Survey. It was the first one for the earth science community. And then do a comparison 2017 versus 2007, how we're approaching this as opposed to that one, what's similar, what's different. The agency backdrop, the pressures on the agencies, the circumstances we're working within today, and how that flows into the Decadal Survey. We'll review the statement of task, talk a little bit about the study panel organization, which is an ongoing activity. You may recall from the last one we have the steering committee and then panels addressing specific elements of the Decadal Survey. Requests for information and community responses. We'll go over the timeline, talk through some of the challenges and considerations associated with this decadal, and then take comments and questions. And I want to point out that we are broadcasting this over the web, and we invite anyone out there in webland. Not 80? Wow, okay, that happened quickly. It was one about 3 minutes ago. I didn't want to speak to just that one person. Which was Art, yes. But we invite questions and comments over the web as well, those of you watching on YouTube. So this really is intended to reach a broad community. We did this at the AGU, we're doing this here, and we're pretty much taking the chances we can get at large scientific fora to have these conversations. So the inaugural Decadal Survey for Earth Science really hit on kind of what's, I won't read this to you, but kind of what's different about this decadal versus the others. The Earth system idea, the fact that, we live here and it literally hits home. The science we undertake, the way we pursue it, and what we learn from it. So there was a recognition that our planet is unique. It's uniquely important to us. It is a system, and we need to examine some of the challenges to the Earth environment in ways that space-based observations uniquely equip us to do. Some examples of the scientific and societal imperatives that came out of the 2007 Decadal Survey were related to climate change and impacts, ice sheets, sea level, ocean circulation, shifts in precipitation, water availability, transcontinental air pollution, ecosystem responses to climate change, human health and climate change, and extreme events. And what's really why these are imperatives, societal imperatives, is they have to do directly with the human relationship to our planet, both what we do to it and how we live with it. These were sort of guiding principles that came out of that Decadal Survey and informed a lot of the recommendations that followed. At that time, we were looking at a different budget than that the Earth observing system emerged under. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll say the time scale goes from 2000 at the left to 2010 at the right. It's a 10-year time scale. And what matters more than the absolute dollars themselves, well, absolute dollars certainly do matter, but the purpose of this graph is to show the relative dollar expenditures, both on missions and instruments. And at the time of the Decadal Survey, let's see if this, yeah. At the time of the decadal survey, right about here, was when the decline was starting to hit, both in instruments and missions. So there really was an imperative to wrestle with this and figure out how can we do meaningful work, establish priorities for observing capabilities to serve society and science in a meaningful way, because we're looking at a significant decline. Where we stand today, this is all the missions either in formulation or operating or being implemented. So it's a pretty robust set of Earth observing capabilities, both instruments and missions. This certainly is in part to the leadership at the federal agencies, but in no small way, it's not a small way that they are related to the activities of the decadal survey. You know, having priorities, having community guidance, having a basis articulated in the recommendations certainly enables the making of the case with OMB, with the White House, with Congress for investments in these kinds of areas. So we do have a lot going on up in space. I think many would argue, I'm among them, that it's not enough for the needs we face, but the decadal survey is an opportunity to really maximize what we can do with what we have. So looking to ESAS 2017, the agency sponsors are NASA, the Earth Science Division at NASA, NOAA, NESDIS, and USGS Climate and Land Use Change Division. And we're actively seeking the participation, or through the NRC, through the committees, of other relevant federal agencies regarding relevant observations, whether they're in situ observations or modeling programs, for example, that will make use of these observations. This is a national imperative. This is a national capability. These are national assets, and we want to realize the best return we can get, and we do that by engaging all relevant entities. Within the Academy, there's collaboration with the Space Studies Board that's leading this, with BASC, with Ocean Studies Board, Board on Earth Science and Resources, and Water Resources, and Technology Board. Boards all over the place. You can't work at the National Academies without this touching you. I think that's a fair statement to say. But the key point of this slide is engagement. Certainly we have our sponsors who wrote the statement of task and are directing the activities, but is very, very far-reaching, well beyond those sponsors to realize the benefits. I'll finish with this slide and then turn it over to Tony to talk more about the agency backdrop and where we're going with this. But it's instructive to do some comparisons between the current decadal survey and the previous decadal survey. The previous decadal survey made recommendations based on an aspirational budget. And I don't think it was, insanely aspirational. They aspired to be what they were in 2000. So I think it was reasonable, but the realities of budgets are such that those aspirations did not pan out. We are looking to make this a science-based set of recommendations rather than a mission-based set of recommendations. Decadal survey certainly did start with science and integrated the science in 2007, integrated the science into recommended missions, but that ended up laying sort of a set of missions at the feet of the agencies, as opposed to these are the priorities and here's how we recommend we achieve them. This will give the agencies a little more play. We'll incorporate some decision rules to avoid some things getting out of hand at the expense of others. There is a congressionally mandated CAPE for the larger items. I think everyone who looked at the last decadal survey, and we were all part of this, saw some optimism in the pricing that did not pan out. So a more robust approach to pricing some of the big ticket notional mission type items. It's likely science will be valued So there'll be some decision rules recommended so that, a commitment to one doesn't drown the others if the costs of implementation seem to increase. Increased opportunities to consider new space ideas, smaller agile spacecraft, CubeSats, small sats, something different than the traditional larger flagship type missions. There is a challenge, though, in developing credible assessments of the capabilities of these kinds of missions or mission ideas versus sort of the claims of their potential. Improved consideration of international partners, that speaks for itself. I won't get into specifics. We're still working that out. And then existence of high-level guidance regarding Earth observations. We have a NASA climate-centric architecture, the OSTP strategy for civil Earth observations, the Earth observation assessment forthcoming. So there's a lot to work with now in terms of national priorities for space-based observations and a framework within which we can work. So we're looking to integrate the perspectives of the science community that we engage in this process, and we're trying to engage as broadly as we can to integrate those into these articulated national priorities or these national frameworks. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, who's going to talk a little more about the backdrop within which we're working and how we're moving forward. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Waleed, and my thanks as well to everybody for coming today to this town hall session without lunch. So, all right, so a little bit of the context of this survey relative to the past and then going forward is that there is a backlog of missions from the first survey, some in formulations, some not. NASA has been given responsibility within the context of the climate-centric architecture for continuity of measurements, and not necessarily always with the resultant budget to do that. Politically, the budget is under ever increasing scrutiny for Earth and environmental sciences, but for the most part has been relatively stable. That decline has been come back from the depths of about 10 years ago. One of the top priorities for NOAA then is the weather satellite portfolio and trying to mitigate and avoid any gap at all costs. Alluded to from above, the climate missions such as Earth radiation budget, total solar radiance, ozone, altimetry. We all have our fingers crossed. Jason 3 is set to launch next week, have been moved to NASA for their responsibility. And again, NOAA has limited budget flexibility beyond that core primary mission of protecting life and property related to the weather mission. USGS, a very strong driver there is the Landsat program, the continuity of those missions, Landsat 8 being launched about 2 years ago, and then the continuation of that data stream and the challenges it proposes in terms of challenges it faces in terms of continuing the data stream while also injecting new technologies. So the primary elements of the statement of task going forward are to assess progress since the 2007 Decadal survey. That's going to be in some sense a baseline going in. And as Waleed mentioned, the first item of business for the committee is to start developing a prioritized list of the top level science and application questions. Identify the gaps and opportunities in the missions of record in both NOAA and the USGS. And it's this last bullet to me. This really defines for me what is one of the fundamental goals for the study. And we will be a successful study if we're able to deliver on developing and recommending a robust approach to a balanced U.S. program of space-based observations of planet Earth. So here is a steering committee that was appointed just about a month ago. Steve Patel, Stacy Boland, Bobby Brown, Shuyi Chen, Bill Dietrich, Scott Doney, Chris Field, Helen Fricker, Bill Gale, Sarah Gilly, Dennis Hartman, Tony Janitos, Everett Joseph, who is here, Molly McCauley, Joyce Penner, Sarush Sarushan, Graham Stevens, Byron Tapley, and Stan Wilson. And both Wally and I could not be more pleased with the breadth, depth, talent, and expertise that we have on this steering committee. Literally 90% of the people we approached to serve on the steering committee accepted that invitation. And the very first meeting of the steering committee will be on Monday morning in Washington. And at that meeting next week, the first item and the main item of business at the meeting is to determine that structure, the panel structure for the survey going forward. And so some of the points that we need to take into consideration, as I'll mention time and again over the next several slides, is addressing Earth system science, but at the same time providing an opportunity for input from the traditional disciplines. There are N different ways to organize an activity such as this. We could organize by societal benefit areas, key science questions or grand challenges, fundamental couplings within the Earth systems and its linkages, or fall back on traditional disciplines. So as Walid already alluded to, in 2007, there was a sort of a thematic approach across about 7 or so panels that broadly mapped to societal benefit areas. And one of the lessons learned from previous decadal surveys, not just the inaugural Earth Science Decadal Survey, but those in heliophysics, astronomy, et cetera, are the benefits of a matrix approach. And I'll provide a slide on that towards the end. So again, here is the structure of the survey 10 years ago. Steering committee about the same size of 18 members, and these 7 panels of about 12 members each. And one of the things we've already noticed in retrospect is sort of the approach to applications was kind of concentrated in here, and yet a number of these areas, I would submit almost every single area of Earth science, as distinct from a number of the space sciences, it runs across the spectrum of basic research, applied research, and operations and applications. And that is sort of a theme that's going to be inherent throughout whatever structure we do. That we're not going to sort of pigeonhole applications unto themselves, but it really is the richness of Earth science that spans basic research all the way to applications. So some of the context that will inform our structure for the panel going forward, and what's up here is taken verbatim from the statement of task given to us by the 3 sponsors, and that being the importance of the various components of Earth as an integrated system, and that we are to be attacking Earth system science from across this broad range of spatial and temporal scales, active and passive, spaceborne, airborne, and in situ assets, and then Earth system science, not just from the basic research perspective, but also informing and helping to aid economic prosperity, national security, and sustainability. So again, we are to provide recommendations to the agencies for Earth science and applications with respect to Earth system science. Now, specific to the needs or the requirements of NASA, we've been asked to identify prioritized strategic science targets for the decade ahead and balance across a number of areas for the NASA program. Balance across this full suite of Earth system science research, technology development, flight mission development, operations, and applications. With respect to NOAA and USGS, our recommendations are not just limited to the research priorities, but are also supposed to be framed within this context of national needs. And specific to NOAA, this means taking into account the overlap and the interdependencies within NOAA's mission for water, weather, climate, and the development of extended forecasts going forwards. And specific to the USGS are the science priorities, not just for climate research, but also natural resource management. So again, these are taken verbatim from the statement of tasks. So at a minimum, the themes that must be accommodated by our structure going forward are Earth system science at the highest level, weather, water, climate, and natural resource management. Now, to inform the committee's deliberations, in September we issued a request for information for what are the key scientific challenges and questions for Earth system science, again across the spectrum of basic research, applied research, and operations for the decade ahead. Why are these challenges or questions timely to address, especially with respect to readiness? And why are space-based observations fundamental to addressing and delivering on these questions and challenges? And to date now, we've received over 200 responses that staff and the committee are going through. If we do a sort of initial mapping against the structure of the Decadal survey last year, the RFI input received to date kind of maps along these sorts of themes from last time, fairly evenly mapped. The other category is kind of a catch-all, but it's informing some of the crosscuts we may be using this time around. New technology, smaller platforms, constellation flying, etc. So again, borrowing from the statement of task, these are the minimum elements that we need to accommodate in the survey structure. But now let's also look at what are the mission areas or the scientific foci for the sponsoring agencies. So NASA science focus areas are atmospheric composition, weather, climate variability and change, the water and energy cycle, carbon cycle and ecosystems, Earth surface and interior. And each one of these is interdisciplinary in its own sense. For NOAA, NOAA's long-term goals are climate adaptation and mitigation, a weather-ready nation, healthy oceans from a marine ecosystem and fisheries perspective, and a more place-based activity being resilient coastal communities and economies. And the mission areas for the USGS are climate and land use change, core science systems, ecosystems, energy and minerals, environmental health, natural hazards, and water. So again, taken together, the guidance from the statement of task, those mission areas from the three agencies, here is just a straw man, a modified structure going forward, maybe something along the lines of weather and air quality, climate on seasonal to centennial timescales, inclusive of the effects of atmospheric composition, water resources and hydrology, carbon cycle and ecosystems, Earth surface and interior, guided by some crosscuts in this other area. And these crosscuts, as I alluded to, are a valuable aspect we've learned from the lessons from previous decadal surveys. What's shown here is the structure of the heliophysics decadal survey, where they had 3 thematic panels shown here, and then these crosscuts that cut across the thematic areas for theory and modeling, platforms, technology, and research to operations, and operations to research. And so what the things next week we'll be deciding upon is deciding on these main fundamental thematic areas and what might be some of these crosscuts. So here's the timeline for the survey for the next 18 months or so. We are here today, and as I mentioned, the first meeting of the survey will be in DC next week. And then the plan is to report out to the agencies in mid-summer of 2017. So in some sense of a summary, these are the challenges and considerations that we will be wrestling with. Again, as Waleed mentioned, the whole issue of proposing a program that is realistic that is actionable based on historical budgets, realistic budget profiles, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to be aspirational. What is it that the country could benefit from and achieve with a realistic increase in the budget? I think we owe that to the agencies, to the Congress, OMB and OSTP, is what is it that's aspirational while also being realistic? As mentioned, this will be the first time the Earth Science Decadal Survey will have gone through the cost and technical evaluation process. For NOAA and USGS, we have to deal with recommendations to improve the service aspect. Again, this is not just a decadal survey for fundamental or basic research. And again, this issue of balance across societal benefit areas, applications, the platforms itself, and for NASA, the RNA program, technology development, flight versus non-flight. So here is the website for more information on the survey. We invite your input. This survey will only be the success that we all want and need it to be if the community, in the fullest sense, is truly vested in this process. And at this point, we'll open it up to comments or questions for those in the room or those online remotely. Have at us anything, comments on the structure would be most appreciative. And with that, thanks very much for your attention. Please state your name and your affiliation, Mike Tanner, NOAA.
Okay, yeah, Mike Tanner, NOAA. It's great to see you guys. Great presentation. So a quick question. So along with this, are you all going to put some thought into maybe looking at the overall architecture on acquisitions and then which agency would operate it and then how to feed back into, like maybe creating science working groups of feedback in, for follow-on instruments, again, to look at this kind of architecture, or have you put any thought into that as well?
Architecture in terms of constellation, that aspect of architecture is clearly going to be fair game in the survey. We have to tread very cautiously with respect to agency assignments and responsibilities.
Right, but given what we know today, what the missions are, you could reiterate that or talk more about maybe how they could work better together.
So that I think is fair game. How we can be more effective and efficient. But again, I think we are loath to be making assignments to the agencies. And again, we'll continue that dialogue with you. Wally?
Nothing to add. That's exactly what I would say.
Ralph Kahn, NASA Goddard. So I was wondering about scope a little bit, and Waleed had a slide there with some agencies listed and so on. I was surprised that the Department of Energy didn't show up there, or the Forest Service. I think I understand about the Forest Service and the EPA, because using space resources to study wildfires and to study air quality is something that's actually developed mostly in the last 7 years or 10 years maybe. So I can see that from the history that might be missing.
So I'm going to turn it over to Art Charo, the study director from the Academy. What we mentioned were the three main sponsors. There is obviously fundamental relevance to a number of other agencies that are not sponsors, including USDA, the intelligence community, the military.
Right.
Art?
That's really the answer. That we were showing the sponsors, but in terms of the agencies that we need to talk with and have at our meetings and be full participants, it includes everything Tony mentioned, and FEMA and Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
I mean, it's basically all the agencies, federal and local, that
Right.
use remote sense data. So,
And a follow-up on that, the international connection. I'm wondering where you'd get the information, because I gather that the panels aren't going to include anyone, I mean, at least from what we've seen so far. Certainly the advisory group doesn't have anybody who would necessarily be involved in international, so, I mean, be part of representing international.
So that is correct. I mean, there's nobody on the steering committee, but that doesn't mean that there won't be on the individual, more discipline or thematic-based panels, where in some sense that may be the more important entry point for international participation at that level.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that in part because it's been a reflection that I've had of the AMS meeting, and that there were a lot of nice resources that have been developed in the United States and they're being applied in the United States, could easily be applied everywhere else in the world and just aren't.
No question. And, you know, we didn't mention it explicitly, but one of the big differences this time around from 10 years ago, there are, you know, a much greater number of spacefaring, legitimate spacefaring nations. The United States will not be able to do it all, and we have to have a program that is collaborative.
If I could just,
Well, one quick comment. You alluded to the panels, Tony. I think it's important for people to understand that the panels is really where the nuts and bolts work is going to be done. The steering committee will serve an integrating function and sort of poke at the panels, why this, why that, how does it fit into the broader picture, kinds of things. But it's really at that level that kind of information is going to be brought to bear.
I just wanted to add, the previous Decadal survey also wanted to consider the internationals in a substantive way, but I think the situation has changed a lot since then. Back then, there was a problem with really understanding how issues about data access and insight into international programs. There's been some real progress there. So I think this time the recommendations will be much more cognizant of what's really out there and what's real.
Hi, my name's Tom Pagano. I'm with NASA JPL, and my question's related to technology. It seems to be moving extremely fast. And the question is, how will you receive inputs on new technical capabilities that can really be game changers in terms of how NASA spends its money, perhaps spending less on the mission hardware and maybe more on science?
Sure, great question. That was referenced in the statement of task. That may well be one of the areas for these crosscuts. The Academy is doing a study right now across the sciences for CubeSats. That report is due to be issued in the spring of this year, so that report will inform the study. And we're also, I mean, we haven't even had the first committee meeting yet, but we still really are entertaining the possibility of a second RFI that may in fact be more technology oriented. Once we identify some of the leading scientific questions, what then are the measurements that are needed to address those questions? What then are the technologies to enable those measurements? And so it may well be in the form of a second RFI.
Okay, thank you.
Phil Ardenoy with Innovum, a very well thought out study. NOAA uses the term environmental intelligence, and a similar term is actionable intelligence. You talked about valuing science. What about valuing applications in a way that certain applications areas, informed by the observations from the areas that will be recommended in the survey, might have the greatest likelihood of yielding actionable information and intelligence the government can use to influence the future?
Sure, fully agree. And that's why I mentioned right now the thinking we're not going to have a sort of a catch-all applications activity unto its side. Applications runs through all of our science. And so it will be inherent in all that we do, not by its side, but you pick the topic: water, climate, weather, carbon, ecosystems. All of them have a very important applications component and components. And so right now that's the thinking of how it's going to be dealt with. It is going to be throughout the whole survey. But again, let me also stress, this is an issue of balance. It's not either or. It's across the spectrum.
Thank you.
So, hi, Steve Volz, NOAA NESDIS. Just to comment on your chart, you showed the chart about the new satellite observations that are either on orbit or in the pipeline. I know that was just chartsmanship, that was a NASA chart, but the point is that I'm making is the JPSS and the GOES missions have really research quality, climate quality satellite measurements as well. So when you portray the near future, we're talking about 3 or 4 very capable satellite systems that are up there that should be part of that whole mix, and not just looking at what the NASA research satellites are.
Yeah,
I'm trying to find the backup slides. They're in there.
It was actually, I thought they were in the slide.
Only to the extent that NASA instruments
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, you're right. It was an NASA slide. So noted. And I think, everybody on the committee, and we'll ensure this is the case with everybody on the panels, recognizes we are talking about Earth observations from space. And the community, as you're well aware, is hungry for whatever is useful to us. So that we'll work on the chartsmanship, but that won't be lost in the work itself. Thanks for pointing that out. Others, or out there in YouTube land?
I don't see anything. I'm hoping that it's not because it's not updated, but I don't see any questions on home.
Should we give out your phone number? People can call in.
Only if they want a writing assignment.
Fair enough.
All right, so we're going to be as open and transparent in this whole process. And let me again repeat my closing lines: is this whole process will only be the success that we need it to be if the whole community is vested in the process. So we'll be counting on a number of you to serve on the panels that we stand forth, and we really do welcome your comments and inputs via contacting us individually and through the website that I showed previously. So again, thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you.